Hello. Okay, so now we're just going to build the muscle. So this time I'm going to teach you guys tricks on how I do studies. So I just take, my normal brush and then I make it red or a different color, and then I highlight the muscle shapes of the form. I even do this with like artwork that I like of other artists. That way that I can learn how they do certain things that I like and try to make it on my own. So for this one, I was, of course, studying the muscles, and I noticed this pattern that kept popping up as I was tracing over the form. Just like in the previous lesson where I mentioned with the representation of the rib cage being the body armor plating, this is when I was doing my studies, this is how I discovered the shape of the M and the W connecting, and how basically the abs are just a bunch of little W's, but how you basically, with these simple shapes, you can connect all forms of the muscle, at least in the torso. The lower legs are similar to where they have a way of connecting with each other, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So now I'm drawing the form on my own, just using the reference, just looking back and forth between the reference. This isn't gesture drawing, by the way. I realized in the last video that I never explained truly what gesture drawing is versus figure drawing. So gesture drawing, according to Google, is a quick fluid sketching technique that captures the essence of a human's figure, movement, and form. So gesture is really just used for you to, one, get the body drawn as quickly as possible, but also to bring fluidness and liveness to your drawing to where it would have probably normally have been stiff. This, however, is more of a figure drawing where I am truly just trying to capture the form of the body and doing a study of specific proportions of the body. So this one is where I am basically just studying how the shape and shadow of the muscles look on the male figure. And to be quite honest, this goes for both male and female. Male and female bodies are actually very similar, especially down to the skeletal structure. There's only two things that really are the telling differences between a male and a female. And to be quite honest, it's not that big of a difference because, doctors, is getting a little bit morbid here, but doctors occasionally have gotten that wrong when they've discovered bodies. But the main difference between wow, gosh, I did not mean to laugh there. Awkward. Okay. The main thing that's different between the male and the female body when it comes down to skeletal structure is actually the pelvis being a little bit bigger on a female skeleton, and the skull of the male the cranium is bigger. So those are like the biggest differences. And then you basically see that on the form of the human body, with the male having a broader eyebrow ridge, and then a female having, a more hourglass shape. But let's get back to the muscles. We've strayed away. But yeah, so the muscles really wrap around each other. So like for the legs, I also noticed that the inner thigh connects immediately to the hip bone, or at least the hip muscle. And that wraps around and easily connects to the underside of the inner side muscle. The terms are escaping me. And you technically don't really need to know them, but Google is my friend today. So the vastus medialis is what the other side muscle is called, for that is underneath the inner thigh muscle, and the one of the many inner thigh muscles is called the gracilis muscle. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but there is a lot of muscles that shape the form, but you really only need to know the basics. Like, you don't need to know all the 50,000 that are in the forearm that connect to the wrist. But you do need to know the shape language of how these muscles are created. That way that you can just get the basic necessities and being able to bring life to your figure. You will need to know how these muscles work eventually down the line. That way when you exaggerate the figure, you start to break it to exaggerate the figure, it still looks at least pleasing to the eye. So here is a couple examples of how the figure is broken down into cylinder shapes and the basic muscles that I use to draw to showcase a muscle group on the body. That it's just 3 connecting cylinders and then a muscle on top, and that's basically it. There are way too many muscles in the wrist, so I just keep it down to 2. And depending on the angle, technically 3. But here are just a couple of examples of me just drawing the arm in several different rotations to show the specific muscles in those groups of the bicep, triceps, and the shoulder muscle. Now, this is also just, shorthand of how I would do it in a gesture form. But as you can see, I'm not really going into too much detail of the muscle. I have a basic understanding of how the muscles look on the body. I'm not even gonna lie. I have a very basic understanding. I don't know the names of that many muscles. And I do have to constantly look up references. References are your friend. Don't let anybody tell you that using references is cheating or anything like that. No, use references so that you can understand the form. I use references when I definitely don't understand certain muscle groups, and that is completely fine. Here I'm drawing the legs and the leg muscles in a very similar way of how I just did the arms, where I'm just showing different forms and positions of how the legs would look and highlighting with the pink and the blue the more important muscles that I tend to focus on. And here is me just basically drawing the skeletal structure on the inside of how that would look, and then the quick basic shape colors on top. And I also, on this one, I used a wireframe to show how the muscles wrap around the body, and that when you're drawing, and especially when you're shading, you want to go with the flow of the body. You want to color in a way that the body is connected and not like disjointed. And an easy form to do that is simply just the shading. So on the little side part, I basically just drew a cylinder, and then the little side part that's open right there is just a representation of what the inner thigh muscle looks like in connection to the cylinder, because that's basically what legs and arms are. They're just cylinders. So I was just reiterating my point right there with that as well. So this is where I decided to do a study of Vaeshawn on Instagram's cosplay of. It took me a while. I didn't realize that it was Gojo. But I believe it's Gojo from Jujutsu Kaisen. And I decided to do 2 studies of him cosplaying as Gojo for this lesson, because he is very fit, obviously. And I wanted to showcase how shading and drawing the muscles on a form, especially someone that is more on the thinner side but is still muscular, would look. And basically to teach you guys that all the shapes of the body connect and are a lot simpler to draw than one would think. So on this picture, I also did the body armor method for the rib cage, which works in all sorts of angles. And another way to help with the guideline with how to draw the figure is by at the top of the M, and you draw basically the sternum to separate the 2 pecs. That leads into the ab line and eventually into the belly button. That creates another simple guideline to draw on the body. Oh, by the way, this is all speed up, by the way. I'll let you guys know when a painting is not sped up and that we're drawing in real time, but this is actually sped up. I took my time because I really wanted to study the form of the body and draw this as accurately as I personally want to draw it, which means that it's not fully accurate. I still took some liberties on drawing the figure, but I wanted it to be at least recognizable. I was definitely struggling with drawing this arm. Foreshortening is not necessarily my strong suit, but it's something that I definitely like when I look at other people's artwork, and I definitely wanted to practice with it. So even though I was having the hardest time with it, it was fulfilling when I finally at least got a portion of it down to where it looked decent. Yeah, it didn't look crazy. However, I will easily say that figuring out the proportion of that, I lost my stamina. So another muscle that I just drew on this reference was the lats, and that connects almost directly underneath the pec line, and basically becomes another guide of how the muscles sit on the body. Everything connects with each other in some shape or way. You can use the lats as a guide to help draw the arm when it's lifted above the body, of drawing the shoulder blades with how it connects, not the shoulder blades, with the shoulder muscle, with how it connects. You can use that triangular shape to pinpoint where the shoulder muscle will go, where the tricep underneath the arm would go, and the bicep. The human body is really just a puzzle piece. Well, actually, not just the human body. To be quite honest, it's once you learn the skeletal structure, even with animals, it becomes, one, it's easier because one, you're doing repetition over and over again, but two, it's just that you understand that the body is a puzzle piece and that everything connects with each other. It's just figuring out how to connect it and making it pleasing to the eye. And because I really wanted to do this as a proper study, at least on one of the figures, I wanted to actually start coloring it in. This is just a simple grayscale. You don't need to have a basic understanding of coloring values or anything like that. We'll go over that in the coloring section of the course anyway. But over here, basically, it's just imagine just shading with your pencil, but you're doing it on grayer paper, or on gray paper instead of white paper. So you're just going in harder with the pencil to, make a different color variation on the paper. And that's essentially what value studies is when we get down the line for that. But right now I'm just coloring in the figure and really trying to accentuate his muscles that from the reference, and study how it looks, so that by the time I want to go off and do my own studies of the muscles, I'll have a general understanding of how they form, whether it's in this position or if I want to draw a different body type, I'll have a better understanding of how those shapes play out. So one thing I want you guys to really get from this lesson is how the body is a puzzle piece, how the muscles connect with the body, and how everything is interwoven together. And though it is complex, it is a puzzle piece that can easily be solved, unlike a Rubik's Cube. But I want you guys to do reference studies. I want you guys to do muscle studies, whether it's isolating the muscles by, like you guys just drawing the arms. I personally don't quite recommend that, only because I think that it is better if you draw the muscles connected to the body rather than by itself. I literally only did that to showcase the muscles for this lesson, but I would actually recommend you draw the figure fully. And then I also recommend you shading in the muscles, very similarly to how I'm doing currently. You don't have to have it filled with gray first and then coloring on top with a darker shade. But as long as you understand how the form shapes as well as how it is drawn, I think you'll have a better understanding of how the muscles work on the body. Don't just do one picture, do several of them. Do as many as you can of not just one figure, but multitudes of figures. So I'll link the Line of Action app on the page, along with a couple of reference photos that you can do muscle studies from, and also a link to my Pinterest where, even though it's a little jumbled, I have a lot of anatomy references, a lot of muscular references that you can use as references to do your studies on. But I recommend you draw and study specifically, basically the entire body, but like you can do waist up in the full form, or you can do the full form with the showing of the legs. But as long as you're doing studies to where you have a goal in mind of, you want to understand how the pec forms, you want to understand how the abs look, you want to understand how the waist connects with the upper part of the torso, you can do that. As long as you have a goal set in mind when you're doing your studies, that is how you'll learn. And that is what I want you guys to do, is when you are studying the muscles, I want you to have a goal in mind on how to get better, and also how these shapes can connect for you. What do you see when you see the muscular part of the human body? If you see a particular shape that helps you shorthand your way into drawing and understanding the figure, use it. Use that tool to help propel yourself into a even better artist than you currently are. My goal in mind for this study for me was literally just understanding the torso. So now that I have done that study, I'm going to go off and basically draw without using a reference and using my own mental library on how to draw these parts of the body. Now, it's not going to look as good as if I had a reference, but I wanted to really learn on my own after doing my studies and see what I can remember, see what I learned in connection to what I didn't know before. And I recommend you guys do that as well. After you do your studies, I would like do 10 figure studies where you're learning the muscle structure. And then after that, do 10 without looking at a reference. And over time, you'll see your artwork grow. It's not going to happen overnight, but eventually you will get better with drawing the figure. And by better, that could just mean that you'll be more comfortable with it, with understanding how the forms flow. So I also wanted to do a female figure as well, because it's very similar in the same way of muscle structure. It's just that the lats will be a little bit higher because of the waist difference. So I just want to plug that in as well. But I do hope that you guys learned at least something from this one with how I draw the figures, how I view the figure and the connecting muscles with the figure, and how basically it all correlates with each other. But don't get frustrated with it. Have fun, and you have the opportunity to not make your homework boring.